I have a lot to say. Hi everybody, my name is Michelle Sutherland. I'm the Director of Prevention Services for the State Department of Education. I'm a licensed school counselor, was a middle school counselor for 5 years at a Title I middle school in Norman. And then I was the Student Advocacy Coordinator at Norman North High School, which was a 6A high school. That position was created after, unfortunately, there were some rapes at the other high school in town. And then the girls felt bullied out of school, which was really a terrible situation. Through that terrible experience, a task force was created, and that task force recommended hiring advocates at each school. It was the first true advocacy positions at any pre-K-12 school in the nation. And so I did that for a year, had all kinds of trauma experience through that, sexual assault, death, suicide, suicidal ideation, abuse. Really, if you can imagine anything bad that happened at a 6A high school, that's what I was dealing with. And so through that experience and through other traumatic experiences that I had worked with when I was a middle school counselor, I became really passionate about trauma and trauma-informed practices. So it became really important to me to put together something for people, and that's where this session came from. I did go to an amazing session, an 8-hour all-day training called TBRI, and this is where part of this training has come from. But I have a lot to tell you about, so we're going to move through it pretty quickly. I can come out to schools and teach this session. I can also, I'm putting together a longer version of this training, more like a half-day type of training. And so if you're interested in something like that, you can just email me to get on my calendar, and I can come out to your district. So just like all teachers, we have learning standards, our professional learning standards. Today are going to be talking about resources and data, but we'll talk about a lot of other things too. So what is trauma? Anything that changes a brain's development is considered trauma. So naturally, we're thinking of things like abuse, assault, a natural disaster, traumatic death, are the first things you typically think of when you think of trauma. But the truth is, anything that changes your brain's development is considered to be trauma. So I'm going to share something personal and a little bit embarrassing with you to help you understand what I'm talking about. I have a phobia of vomit. I know nobody likes it, obviously, but I am like panic attack, not take care of my kids when they're sick, sleep in the car type of extreme reaction. And it's because when I was in first grade, my dad was ill and I thought he was dying. And so it was like a 220 volt event and a 9 volt brain. And my wires got crossed and started to associate two things that shouldn't be associated together. So I had a traumatic experience that to some of you might not have been traumatic at all. But for me, it was. The same thing can be true for people who get bit by a dog, who had a traumatic experience on this last week that said they had a traumatic experience with a ceiling fan, and they hate ceiling fans, can't have them in their home. So really, anything that affects the brain's development can be considered trauma. So you have kids who all have all kinds of traumatic experiences that may or may not be considered traumatic to you, but they are to the child. So I want you all to meet Ben. He was such a cute little baby. He was 9 pounds and 3 ounces. He had 10 fingers and 10 toes. He had a pretty normal APGAR score, and he's nice and pink. When he was a baby, he hit all his developmental milestones on time. He sat up on time, rolled over on time, crawled, walked, spoke, all the things that you do, a baby needs to do. He did all within the normal range. But when he was about 18 months old, people started noticing that he would start to hyper-focus on things, kind of tune everything else out. In this picture, he's playing with a little Superman toy, and people were around him, talking to him, trying to get his attention, and he totally shut out everything and was hyper-focused on this toy. Then Ben started school, and he was a cute little guy starting school, but it was pretty obvious from the very beginning that Ben had a tough guy complex, and you know the kind that throw blocks, the kind that kick and bite and push down other children and are mean in general. The other thing that the teacher noticed is that Ben would fall asleep at really odd times. So for example, sometimes at circle time, Ben would be laying over on the person next to him, sound asleep. As he got a little bit older, he got more and more angry. Ben started destroying classrooms. He started throwing things. He started flipping desks and tables over, picking up chairs. Teachers started having to clear classrooms when Ben would have a meltdown. He also would cry at the most awkward, inopportune times about things that you wouldn't consider that you would normally cry about. Ben was the kid who sucked in all the other kids to behave badly with him. And you know the type of kiddo that I'm talking about. He also would come to school sometimes, I don't know if you can see it, but he had scratches. He had a big scratch on his face in this picture. He had scratches on his face, he had bruises, he had bumps. Sometimes he would have black eyes, and every time you'd ask him, Ben, what happened to you? He would make up a story about his dog scratching him, falling out of a tree, falling down the stairs. All his excuses didn't make any sense, and you really didn't believe him. Ben continued to grow, and he continued to struggle. So how many of you have heard of the ACE study? Adverse Childhood Experience. Any of you heard of that? Okay, so the Adverse Childhood Experience study is a 10-question scale that you ask about a person, and it relates to what happened to them before they were 18 years old. And so the higher your number, the more likelihood there is for things that are bad in your life. More likely you are to drop out of school. The more likely you are to go to prison. The more likely you are to have a disease. The more likely you are to die young. Anything bad that you can imagine, the higher your ACE score, the more likely it is to happen to you. So we're going to go through Ben's ACE score and determine what Ben's ACE score is. While you were growing up during your first 18 years of life, did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often swear at you, insult you, put you down, or humiliate you, or act in a way that made you afraid that you might be physically hurt? Well, Ben was the oldest of 5 siblings. They were back to back to back to back. He was frequently taking care of the siblings because Mom had bipolar disorder, and because Mom lived in poverty and didn't feel like she could afford health care, she turned to street drugs, and now Mom is addicted to meth. So she has a revolving door of people in and out of her house all the time, and Ben never felt safe. As you can imagine, some of these people hurt Ben, including his mom. So that's a 1 for Ben. Did a parent or other adult in the household often or very often push, grab, slap, or throw something at you, or ever hit you so hard that you had marks or were injured? Unfortunately for Ben, the answer was yes. Anytime any of his siblings did anything wrong, it got taken out on Ben. Did a person or an adult at least 5 years older than you ever touch or fondle you, or have you touch their body in a sexual way, or attempt to actually have oral, anal, or vaginal intercourse with you? Now, we're not sure about Ben. Our only clues are that we know that there was a revolving door of people in and out of his house, but we're not going to give him a 1 on that one because we're not really sure. Did you often or very often feel that no one in your family loved you or thought you were important or special, or your family didn't look out for each other, feel close to each other, or support each other? Ben didn't feel cared for, supported, or really even loved most days. So that's a 3. Did you often or very often feel that you didn't have enough to eat, had to wear dirty clothes, had no one to protect you, or your parents were too drunk or high to take care of you or take you to the doctor if you needed it? Now Ben is a 4. Were your parents ever separated or divorced? Well, Ben never really remembered meeting his dad because when Ben was about 2 months old, his dad robbed a liquor store and got arrested and went to prison. So we're going to go ahead and make that a 5 for Ben. Was your mother or stepmother often or very often pushed, grabbed, slapped, or had something thrown at her? Or sometimes often or very often kicked, bitten, hit with a fist, or hit with something hard, or ever repeatedly hit at least a few minutes or threatened with a gun or a knife? As you can imagine, now we're at a 6 for Ben. Did you live with anyone who was a problem drinker, alcoholic, or used street drugs? Now we're at 7. Was a household member depressed or mentally ill, or did a household member attempt suicide? Ben could remember his mother attempting suicide 3 times. So now we're at 8. Did a household member go to prison? We know Ben's dad is in prison, so now we're at a 9. So Ben's A score is a 9 of a 10. Research shows that a child is considered at risk if they are a 3 or higher. And again, the higher your A score, the more likely you are to have bad things happen to you. So a 3 or higher. And I hate to tell you that I just read an article this weekend that said in Oklahoma, children who have a 3 or higher A score include 45.5% of the population of children in Oklahoma. Almost half of the children in Oklahoma have an A score of 3 or higher. So half of the students in your schools, in your classrooms, in your offices have an A score of 3 or higher. 3 or higher traumatic experiences. It's not okay, and this is what we're dealing with. So now my next question for you is, were any of these things that happened to Ben his fault? None. Not a single one were Ben's fault. So it's really important to remember when you're dealing with flipping desks and throwing staplers and meltdowns that what has happened to this child is not his fault. So we're going to talk about trauma, fear, and brain capacity. This is our brain fully at work. This is a brain. I'm not a scientist, but I want you to know this is a brain. And when our brain isn't fully at work, we're able to use all areas of our brain. But when we are in survival mode, we are only able to use our brain stem. So I want you to think about that for a second. We have a seat right up here if you want to come sit down. It's okay. When we're in survival mode, we're only using our brain stem. When we are only using our brain stem, are we able to learn? Nope. It is not until somebody feels safe that they're able to learn, because they're only using their brain stem when they feel fear. Ben was living out of survival mode. Ben was afraid 100% of the time. He never knew where his next meal was coming from unless he was at school. He never knew what he would walk into when he went home for the day. He never knew what would be at his house. He never knew if his mom would be with it or not. He never knew if his clothes would be there because they moved around a lot too. Ben was 100% of the time in survival mode. So my question for you is, could Ben learn? No. Ben was only able to use this part of his brain, because this is flight or fight, because he was afraid all the time. So I want to talk to you about the circle of security. The circle of security is basically children have needs, we respond, they welcome you into their world if you respond correctly, and then you become a safe haven for the child. So it's a circle. Children have needs. Our response should be with oversight, delight, help, and enjoyment. When we do that, a child welcomes you into their world. They begin to feel safe and secure, and that is when learning can start to happen. So I want to tell you a story about a young man that I met my first year as a counselor. He was a kid who had a lot of trauma. He probably had a pretty high ACE score. And this young man wore a hat to school every single day. Hats were not allowed at our school. So every single day, this student was getting in trouble for wearing a hat to school because it was against the rules. So one day, my principal followed him around, kind of snuck around and followed him around before school started. And that day before school started, he had 10 negative interactions with adults before the school day ever started. Those interactions are like, give me that hat. What are you doing wearing a hat? You know you're breaking the rule. You're doing that on purpose. What is wrong with you? You're an idiot. Why would you do that? That's the kind of interactions that he's having with teachers. So how would that have changed if instead I would have walked up to him and said, hey, I'm so glad to see you at school today. I know that you had a choice on whether or not to come. Thank you for choosing to come. I see that you're wearing a hat, and so I was going to offer to hold on to it for you until the end of the day so nobody would try to take it away from you because I don't want you to get in trouble. Would that be okay with you? So I still responded with oversight because I did not let him wear his hat. That's the rule. He couldn't wear his hat. I was delighted to see him. I told him he had a choice on whether or not he came to school, which he definitely did. I offered help to hold on to his hat so he wouldn't get in trouble, and I enjoyed my conversation with him. When we start having conversations like this with our kids, we start changing the way they see us, our relationships. They start to welcome us into their world. They start to feel safe and secure, and that is when learning can begin. And guys, I know it's not easy, because this is the same child who my first couple of weeks as a counselor was disrespectful to me in the cafeteria in front of other kids, which is my one button. Like, I have one button, and that's it, right? And so I got right in his face. I'm like, don't you be disrespectful to me. And all of a sudden, I felt somebody pulling my shirt back, and I look, and it's my principal. He's yanking me back. And he's like, Michelle, did you see that he had his fist balled up? He was about to hit you. You cannot bow up to a kid like that. Those kids, they will hit you. So what I did instead was, when he definitely did it again. But on those times, I would walk away because I was mad, and I know I couldn't talk to him when I was mad. And later, when I wasn't so mad, I'd call him into my office and say, hey, man, you really hurt my feelings. I'm nice to you. I'm kind to you. I show you respect, and you were really rude to me. And every single time I handled it that way, his response was, oh, man, I'm really sorry, Mrs. Sutherland. I didn't mean to be disrespectful. So the way you handle it matters, and it matters on the type of relationship you have with the student. So we're going to take a look at the attachment cycle. We have needs expressed and needs met. Over here on this side, we have comfort. So we have inhibitory neurotransmitters and the parasympathetic nervous system. Over here on this side, we have distrust. We have the excitatory neurotransmitters and the sympathetic nervous system. You're like, what does that all mean? Let me tell you. And I, again, want to mention I'm not a scientist, but I am able to give you some definitions. The sympathetic nervous system primary response is to stimulate the body's flight or fight response. However, the parasympathetic nervous system's primary response is to rest and digest. So let me ask you, which would you rather have in your classroom, flight or fight or rest and digest? Rest and digest, right? So we really want the parasympathetic nervous system to be in action in our classrooms and in our schools. Likewise, we have the inhibitory neurotransmitters that are the chemical messengers that transmit messages to the nerves to inhibit you. And on the other side of that, we have the excitatory neurotransmitters, which are chemical messengers that transmit messages to excite you. So while we want kids to be excited about our content, of course, would we rather have an inhibited child in our classroom or a hyper-excitable child in our classroom? Inhibited, right? So when we look at this again, we want comfort. We want the inhibitory neurotransmitters and the parasympathetic nervous system to be in play. When you have a lack of felt safety, it manifests in emotional deregulation. We program our neurosystems of the children by helping them learn how to regulate. The parasympathetic nervous system has to get exercised. Just like anything, we have to practice and we have to exercise this part of our body. And it all starts with a relationship and connection. Did you know that when a baby is born, he has the same neurochemical profile as his mother? So what was Ben's neurochemical profile? Bipolar. What else? On drugs. What else? What else do we know about mom? High risk. Suicidal, constant stress, abused. Were any of those things Ben's fault? Not a one. So what affects neurochemistry? There are three things: nutrition, mental illness, and trauma. Which one can we affect out of these three? Nutrition. How many of you have snack drawers in your offices or desks or at school? If you don't, and you're like, Michelle, I'm a teacher, I can't afford to buy snacks for myself, let alone my students, partner with your PTA, partner with a church, Partner with a nonprofit that can get you snacks for a drawer in your classroom or in the office so you can help kids have a nutritious snack when they're hungry, because they're going to be hungry, for sure. There are 3 pillars of trauma-informed care. There's felt safety, connection, and self-regulation. Which one, as educators, do we have the biggest impact on? Connection. Now, we can help people feel safe. We can help them self-regulate. But connection is up to us. It is solely up to us to build a connection with students. So connection is where we have to spend our time and energy. I have a video to show you that talks about that connection. In the back, would you mind turning off the lights so our friends in our live streaming room can see it, please?
Babies this young are extremely responsive to the emotions and the reactivity and the social interaction that they get from the world around them. This is something that we started studying 30, 40 years ago, when people didn't think that infants could engage in social interaction. And the still face experiment what the mother did was she sits down and she's playing with her baby who's about a year of age. And she gives a greeting to the baby gives a greeting back to her. This baby starts pointing at different places in the world, and the mother's trying to engage her and play with her. They're working to coordinate their emotions and their intentions, what they want to do in the world. And that's really what the baby is used to. And then we ask the mother to not respond to the baby. The baby very quickly picks up on this, and then she uses all of her abilities to try and get the mother back. She smiles at the mother. She points because she where she points. The baby puts both hands up in front of her and says, "What's happening here?" She makes that screechy sound at the mother, like, "Come on, why aren't we doing this?" Even in this 2 minutes, when they don't get the normal reaction, they react with negative emotions. They turn away. They feel the stress of it. They actually may lose control of their posture because of the stress that they're experiencing.
That's not easy to watch, is it? It's not easy to watch. What does it make you think of as educators? This video, what does it remind you of? Or make you think about?
Kids who seek any kind of attention they can get, whether it's positive or negative.
Kids seeking attention, either negative or positive, yeah. What else?
I hate to admit, as an educator, but sometimes I'll give a still face if I want that child to stop doing what he's doing.
Right. Sometimes we do that. We give a still face because we're done for the day, right? We're out of gas. We're done. What about holding a phone and checking out? How many times have you done that? I've done it all the time. Where my kids will be talking to me and I can hear them talking. I have no idea what's going on. And they're like, "Mom," and I'm like, "Huh?" We have kids seeking attention for all kinds of ways. And this is a baby. She kind of rapid cycles through this attention getting process. But this is true with kids of all ages. They seek attention doing naughty things. So give them the attention they need ahead of time. So when you talk about trauma and trust, you're talking about connection principles, empowering principles, and correction principles. Did you know that 90% of learning is nonverbal? 90%. So I want you to look around this room. What are some things that you're learning just from being in a room non-verbally? What do you learn about the teacher whose room this is? History, visual. She has some rules, doesn't she? Be kind, be responsible, be respectful, be honest, be your best. Tidy. Creative. She probably teaches a Native American class of some sort. Or builds upon that. So you're learning things non-verbally. So instead of throwing our words at kids when they act up, what if we engaged directly? What if we tried getting on their level, had healthy touch, and modulated our voice? So this is I talk about my own kids because it doesn't break FERPA. So I have a son, I have two boys. One of them started going through puberty about 1.5 years ago. And I don't know if you know this, but when kids start to go through puberty, they lose their baby minds. They're like crazy people, especially boys, for whatever reason. And so what happens is the frontal lobe is starting to develop, and when the frontal lobe starts to develop, their brain is a baby. So they start reverting in behavior as well, which is really normal. I have to always remind myself that I'm not a terrible parent, that this is really normal behavior. So my son was having a temper tantrum about something, and I can't even tell you what it was, but he was sitting on the floor having a temper tantrum. And so I had just been to this class, and I thought, I'm going to try it. I'm going to see what happens. So I got down on one knee. I put my thumb under his chin and my finger on his chin really gently, not hard. I was not hurting my child. I guided his gaze into my eyes, and I lowered my voice. Now, this is not what I normally would do. I'm a yeller, I'm going to admit to you. So, first of all, he was caught off guard, and he's like, what's up with this counselor voodoo? But the next thing that happened was he started to calm down. It was amazing. I tend to just escalate because I am such an emotional response type of person anyway. So whenever his response started to come down, I'm like, oh, it started to work. Another example of this is both of my boys had the same pre-K teacher. Her name is Elizabeth Dalma, and she is magical. When I took my oldest son in to meet her for the first time, she said, hi, I'm so happy to meet you. And I thought, oh my goodness, she's in trouble. Has she met 4-year-olds before? Because they are a little bit crazy. And she was so soft-spoken and quiet, and I was really concerned for her safety. But as I got to know her and watch her, the softer she spoke in her classroom, the quieter the kids got. It was like a magic trick. I get goosebumps just thinking about it, because it was the first time I realized that you could really use voice modulation to totally change the outcome of a situation. It can totally de-escalate a situation. I still think she's magic, and she taught both my boys. I think she's wonderful. But it was a magic thing to watch happen, because I wanted to yell, but instead I lowered my voice, and magic totally happened. On connection principles, we work on eliminating fears, paying attention to their communication. If they're going to stomp in your room, is that a good time to talk to them? Probably not. They probably need to calm down. You probably need to modulate your voice, get them to calm down before you have that conversation. Be empathetic, and we'll talk more about that in a second. Strive for emotional balance. When I taught this class, one of the first times, I had a teacher tell me something excellent. He said, if I have a crazy class, which he had 1 hour of the day that was typically more crazy than the rest, in that class, I have a hard time, and I'm not okay when that class is over, I tell the next class, hey guys, I need your help. Can you give me 5 minutes of quiet? Here's some bell work. Here's something for you to read. Here's something for you to do. Would you please do that and give me 5 minutes so I can calm down and so I can be a better teacher for you? He said it worked every time because kids love to help you. I don't know if you've asked kids for help before, but when you ask kids for help, they're like, oh, yes, let me help. I'm a good helper. Kids of all ages love to help. Start asking for their help. You guys, use your intuition and insight. We have so much experience just in this room of education, of working with children. You have so much experience, even if it's 1 year of working with children. Use your gut. Trust your gut. Best advice as a new mama I ever got was trust your gut. Use your mama instinct. The same is true for us educators. Trust your educator gut. If your educator gut is saying do this or something's not right here, listen to that intuition and trust your experience. And of course, helping them regulate their body and their emotions is also really, really important. I know some of you were in my last session, but I'm going to show this video again. It's about empathy. I just did a whole session on empathy. But this is a less than 3-minute video that talks about how important empathy and what it looks like. So I'm going to show it to you now. Maybe. We're going to watch a little trailer first. Here we go.
So what is empathy, and why is it very different than sympathy? Empathy fuels connection. Sympathy drives disconnection. Empathy, it's very interesting. Teresa Wiseman is a nursing scholar who studied professions, very diverse professions where empathy is relevant, and came up with 4 qualities of empathy. Perspective taking, the ability to take the perspective of another person or recognize their perspective as their truth. Staying out of judgment, not easy when you enjoy it as much as most of us do. Recognizing emotion in other people and then communicating that. Empathy is feeling with people. And to me, I always think of empathy as this kind of sacred space when someone's kind of in a deep hole and they shout out from the bottom and they say, I'm stuck, it's dark, I'm overwhelmed. And then we look and we say, hey, climb down. I know what it's like down here, and you're not alone. Sympathy is, ooh, it's bad, no, you want a sandwich? Empathy is a choice, and it's a vulnerable choice, because in order to connect with you, I have to connect with something in myself that knows that feeling. Rarely, if ever, does an empathic response begin with at least. And we do it all the time, because you know what? Someone just shared something with us that's incredibly painful, and we're trying to silver lining it. I don't think that's a verb, but I'm using it as one. We're trying to put the silver lining around it. So, I had a miscarriage. At least you know you can get pregnant. I think my marriage is falling apart. At least you have a marriage. John's getting kicked out of school. At least Sarah is an A student. But one of the things we do sometimes in the face of very difficult conversations is we try to make things better. If I share something with you that's very difficult, I'd rather you say, I don't even know what to say right now, I'm just so glad you told me. Because the truth is, rarely can a response make something better. What makes something better is connection.
I just love this video. I think it totally addresses how we should act, what empathy is, and why it's beneficial. I show it in like every presentation I give. So if you come to my next presentation at 1, you'll see it again, because it's so good at describing empathy and why it's important. We're going to talk about connection principles. Being authoritative is important, but not yelling or shouting. We don't need to yell or shout to get our message across. Making eye contact is important. Matching their behavior. I had a 6'5", 300-pound 7th grade autistic kiddo that was under my caseload, and he would have meltdowns. And when you have a 6'5", 300-pound 7th grade autistic child, they can be kind of scary. So we came up with a plan. He loved computers. So what we would do is he would reboot himself, and I would do it with him. So we would lay in the floor. We'd turn ourselves off. We'd lay in the floor, and then we'd hit the on button and reboot. And we'd set up, and we'd slowly get started again. And I did it with him every time. And you know what? It worked every time. I don't know how that happened. I'm not a magician. But for him, that worked because it helped that I did it with him. So I matched his behavior. Having playful interaction. An example of this is somebody's like going to tell you no, which is a button for sure, right? And for you to say, are you asking or telling? You know, with a smile on your face, something simple like that. Or if they're acting crazy, you act crazy with them. It's going to definitely catch them off guard at the very least. And healthy touch. Healthy touch would be like a fist bump, a high five, a pat on the shoulder if the kiddo's okay being touched. One thing that I like to do whenever I do healthy touch, if I'm talking to someone, and if you meet me, you're going to probably find this to be true, is if we're talking, I will gently touch your elbow. The elbow is like the least threatening body part for somebody to touch. And if I feel like it's appropriate, I'll touch their elbow, and it's an immediate connection with someone when you touch them like that. Did you know that 90% of when a breakdown happens, it happens during a transition? How many transitions do we have in a day? 1 million. You know, you think about an elementary classroom, and just in the morning, you have like 30 transitions from station to block time to getting a drink to recess to your specials, whatever it is, you're transitioning them constantly, and you have to because research says that is what is developmentally appropriate for that child. But even like in a math class, let's say, you start with passing period. They come in, they sit down, you have bell work. After bell work, you teach a little bit, then you have small group work, then you have individual work, then you have one-on-one with the teacher, and then it's time to transition back into passing period. We transition constantly, all the time. So what's really helpful for students who struggle and have trauma is to give them visual reminders of what is about to happen. This could be with the bell schedule on the wall. This could be writing on the board what your day is going to look like. This could be writing down on a sticky note and sticking it on their desk and walking by. It could be telling them and having them write it down. It might look like different things for different kids and what works, but it's really important to let them know what kind of transitions. It's also things like, hey, tomorrow we're going to change seats, and you're going to sit right here, and I wanted you to know. Giving them a heads up. I did this with my own children when I would say 5 minutes till whatever, time to go, time to leave the park, time to leave the McDonald's play area, and then 2, and then 1, and then we'd go. And that 5 minutes might last 30 seconds. I'm going to be honest, it might. But I give them those cues so they would be more prepared to move on to the next thing. Other empowering principles are sensory diets. Like, how many of you guys have used a weighted blanket? They're so good. Oh my goodness, they're so good. But if you don't have a weighted blanket, use a heavy textbook or a backpack, or some kids like to wear their coats, whatever it is. Transitions, we talked about. Touch points. Sometimes you're the touch point, and they need to see you multiple times a day to make sure they're going to have a good day. Artifacts. My younger son gave his primary counselor, who is amazing, a sock monkey one year for Christmas. He picked it out. And that was about 5 years ago. And this year at Christmas, she sent him a note in me. I kept it because I loved it. But she said, I just want you to know that the sock monkey you gave me has a job. I have a little girl who won't go to class unless the sock monkey goes with her. So she starts every day. She picks up the sock monkey goes with her through the day, and she brings it back at the end of the day. And that's the only thing getting her to class. And that's what's needed sometimes. Rituals, managing hydration and blood sugar, regular physical activity, those extra recesses are really good, or walking around the track while you do spelling words, or going outside to write it in chalk. Anytime you can get extra physical activity, it's really good. Nutritional needs, and again, healthy touch. Using life value terms like gentle and kind. Let's be gentle and kind. We are gentle and kind in my classroom. We're going to do that the gentle and kind way. That's the way of our school. That's the way at Cash 5th and 6th Grade Center. It's gentle and kind. That's how we do things. Use your words. I say that to adults sometimes when I probably shouldn't, but use your words. With respect, this is a good one too. If you have a child who's being disrespectful, instead of going, stop being disrespectful to me, which is what you want to say, Instead, try saying, okay, why don't you try telling me that again, but this time trying it with respect, and have them do a redo. Sometimes it works. Proactive strategies include choices. I love choices. I love love and logic. I think it's so important. A choice could be something simple like, when we change our seating charts, you can sit here or here. You get to choose. Or do you want to be line leader today or tomorrow? Or do you want to be first in line or last in line? Or do you want to hold the door for us or be the first one out on the playground? Whatever it is, offering two or more choices that you can live with. Super, super important and very empowering. We know that trauma victims need choices. Do you want water or soda? Do you want water or juice? Do you want a salad or do you want a hot meal? As many choices as you can offer are really important. Compromises. I have kids in my class or my office all the time who would say, I can't go to English today because I'm having a meltdown, and they were having a meltdown. And instead of missing the whole hour because I knew they needed to be there, I'd say, how about I set the timer for 20 minutes? Oh, I can't do 20 minutes, Mrs. Sutherland. Well, what do you need? I need the whole hour. Well, what if we do 30 minutes and then we see where we are at the end of 30 minutes? Okay, that's a good compromise. So making compromises when you can. And then behavioral redos. One example that I love to talk about is I did lunch duty every day. So I would, 8th graders like strut through the lunch line because they got to be cool. But 6th graders sprint through the lunch line. So instead of giving a consequence, have them go, sit back down, and then walk through the line when it's appropriate. Or they blurt out something. Let's try that again with raising your hand. And let me call on you, and then you can tell me the answer. The ideal response is immediate, 3 seconds or less, direct, efficient, action-based, and leveled at the behavior, not the child. Because I want us to think about Ben again for a second. Are any of the things that happened to Ben, are any of the traumatic experiences Ben's fault? They are not. So level your ideal response at the behavior, not Ben. Sometimes it's hard because we grow to not like kids, but we have to model empathy and we have to do our best to level our critique at the behavior, not the child. Well, speaking about Ben, I have a confession to make. Ben is just a character I made up. This child's name is actually Will Sutherland. He is my son. He happens to be very expressive. I'm not on meth, by the way. I just created a character based on all the other kids that I've worked with. And because he is so expressive, I was able to use his pictures to tell our story today. So he's a great kid. He really is. Like, he has very few issues, except that frontal lobe thing, but all kids do. So we'll let it slide this time. Does anybody have any questions? Comments? Yes?
I had one question on the pillars of trauma. Felt safety, connection, what was the third one?
Self-regulation.
Okay. Thank you.
Yep. Anybody in here LPC, LMFT, or nurse that didn't get a pink slip? Other questions? Okay, if you guys need anything, you let me know. I can come and give this presentation at your districts. Email me to get on my calendar. I'll be teaching again today at 1 o'clock in the same room. So meeting and identifying the needs of at-risk students. So you guys have a great day. Thank you so much for coming.
Okay, I'm Laura from Anadarko. I'm one of 2 teachers at the conference from Anadarko, myself and a math teacher. I've been called, I'm Christian.